It was quite early one morning in the little seaside town, before the gulls had begun their argument with the wind, before the shop blinds blinked open like slow eyes. The air was still damp with sleep, and the world smelled of salt and stone. I walked the narrow streets as though through a dream stitched together with chimney smoke and the sighing sea. The houses leaned toward each other like gossiping old men, their windows clouded by last night's breath. Cats slid silent across doorsteps. A milk cart clattered distantly, lonely as a hymn. Somewhere behind the church, a cockerel crowed once, an impatient herald of the day. I passed the post office, the bakery, the pub still heavy with the ghosts of last night's laughter. In each quiet place, life was gathering itself. The baker yawning into his apron, the widow turning her key in the door, the sea already restless beyond the harbor wall. The world was fragile in that hour, soft as dough before the oven. I felt I could lift the town in my hands and feel its heartbeat, the slow throb of small lives all waiting to begin again. The voices of the people I knew, the butcher with his crimson smile, the cobbler tapping life back into tired souls, the school children not yet awake to their day's small miracles, all of them seemed to murmur in the hush. The sun crept pale over the roofs, touching the chimneys like a blessing. And I thought how beautiful the world was before it remembered itself, before it put on its clamor and its cares, before it began the daily masquerade. The sea called faintly, the sky widened, and the town, still half asleep, stirred beneath the light. The town began to wake, and with it its thousand murmuring souls. The quiet I had loved just moments ago was torn gently by the sound of doors unlatching, kettles sighing, the first laughter of children spilling into the morning. The mist thinned, and faces appeared like lanterns through a fog, each one familiar, each one carrying the weight of another ordinary day. From the bakery came the smell of warm bread, holy and human. Mr. Davies, the postman, shuffled down the cobbles with his bag of secrets, love letters, overdue bills, small dreams folded in envelopes. He nodded to me, half asleep, half smiling. "Early again, is it?" he asked. I told him the morning was too lovely to miss. He laughed softly. "Lovely till the rain remembers us." The sea glittered beyond the roofs, restless and eternal as Mrs. Jenkins threw open her shutters, her voice already scolding her invisible cat. Down the lane young Tom from the forge sang as he worked, his song rough but alive, ringing like hope on iron. The town was waking not with haste, but with rhythm, each sound fitting into another, a living orchestra of everyday life. And as I walked, I felt the strange ache that comes when beauty hides in the ordinary, when you love something not for its grandeur, but for its small, persistent pulse. I wanted to tell them all, the butcher sharpening his blade, the girls brushing crumbs from their aprons, the old men coughing in doorways, that they were part of something rare and fleeting. But they would have only laughed. For them, the day was not poetry, but duty. And yet beneath their chores, their gossip, their sighs, I could feel it, that secret music, the quiet miracle of simply being alive in a place that knew their names. The sun climbed higher, the streets grew louder, and the morning, once sacred, became just another day. But I walked on, carrying its fragile light like a secret in my chest. By noon, the town had become a living thing, its pulse thundering beneath the cobbles, its breath in the wind that rolled off the sea. The hush of dawn had long dissolved into chatter, the hammer of hooves on stone, the gulls crying overhead, the eternal gossip of the market, where fish and stories were sold with equal flourish. Yet beneath the noise, beneath the laughter and the clatter, there was something else, a trembling, like the earth waiting to speak. I stopped by the harbor wall, watching the tide creep inward, licking the moss-dark stones like a lover returned. A boy threw pebbles into the water, each splash a question with no answer. An old woman, shawl drawn tight, muttered prayers that sounded like curses. The town, I thought, was a dream that refused to wake, each life a strand of the same tangled net. And then it came, that moment of stillness that feels like revelation. A cloud slid across the sun, and the sea turned from silver to iron. The laughter in the street faltered. A wind rose from nowhere, carrying the smell of rain and memory. For a heartbeat, everything paused, as if the whole town was listening for a word it had forgotten how to say. I heard it then, or thought I did, the true voice of the place, speaking not in sound, but in feeling, in the trembling air and the tightening of my chest. It was the voice of all the mornings and all the dead, of every soul that had ever walked these narrow streets and called them home. It said, "We are here. We are still here." And just as suddenly the spell broke, the clouds scattered, children laughed again, the gulls wheeled and screamed, the butcher shouted his prices, but the world was changed, not in what it showed, but in what I saw. For I knew then that every soul in this small town, every cough, every quarrel, every prayer half whispered to no one, was a note in a vast, unseen hymn. And though the day would fade, as all days must, its music would linger, echoing softly beneath the silence. By late afternoon, the town had grown tired of its own noise. The market emptied, the echoes of laughter thinned like smoke. The sun, swollen and red, leaned against the horizon, spilling its slow fire over the roofs. The tide pulled back, leaving behind the glistening bones of seaweed and shells that whispered of departures. I wandered through the narrowing streets, where shadows stretched like long fingers and voices softened into murmurs. The air smelled of cooling bread and sea salt, and somewhere a piano played, hesitant, tender, a tune stitched from longing. Through the half-open windows came the sounds of quiet rituals, a woman humming as she folded clothes, a kettle sighing once more, the low bark of a dog that knew the day was nearly done. The town was shedding its daylight mask, revealing the fragile pulse beneath. Lovers met in doorways, their whispers almost holy. Old men leaned together by the pub, trading their stories like coins. Even the drunkards spoke gently, as though afraid to wake the night before its time. I paused outside the chapel, its windows glowing amber from within. The hymn that drifted through the open door was old, older than memory, a song that seemed to rise not from throats, but from the earth itself. The sound filled the street, brushed against my face, and for a moment I felt the whole town breathing together, each soul a flickering candle in the great hush of evening. But the light was fading fast. Lamps blinked to life, one by one, their halos trembling in the mist. A child cried somewhere, a sharp, bright sound that broke the stillness. Then all was quiet again. I knew then that the day's heart had begun to slow. What had been bright and careless now turned inward, softer, almost sorrowful. The beauty of the morning was not gone, only changed, distilled into a tender ache that lingered in the edges of things. The glint of dusk on wet stone, the sigh of the wind through the alleyways, the last gull circling above the harbor before vanishing into the gray. The town had begun to dream again, even before night arrived. When the last light died behind the hills, the town surrendered to darkness with the ease of a sigh. The streets, once loud and alive, now lay wrapped in the hush of sleep. Only the faint gleam of lamplight flickered through curtained windows, small golden hearts beating against the black. I stood once more by the harbor wall, The tide had returned, slow and patient, brushing the stones like a mother soothing her restless child. The sea, dark as ink, whispered its endless story to the shore, of things lost, of things found again in dreams. Far off, a bell rang from a fishing boat, its sound carrying like a prayer through the damp air. From the cottages came the soft music of sleep, a snore, a murmured name, a shifting in beds. The whole town that had lived and laughed and argued and sung through the day now floated together in the same deep current of dreaming. It was as though night had drawn a blanket over its heart, tucking it in with stars. I thought of all I had seen, the laughter, the quarrels, the quiet kindnesses that stitched the hours together. In the end, they all folded into silence, not the silence of emptiness, but of completion. The world for a moment seemed to rest on a breath. And yet beneath that stillness, the pulse remained, slow, eternal, waiting. Tomorrow the same voices would rise again, Mrs. Jenkins scolding her cat, the baker cursing his oven, the postman humming to himself as he climbed the hill. Life, with all its foolishness and grace, would begin anew. But for now, Luryagub slept. Its people lay in their beds, their dreams weaving the same tapestry that morning would one day unroll. The stars hung above like eyes that remembered, and the sea went on, whispering its low, tireless hymn. And I, standing alone in that vast and breathing quiet, felt the old truth move within me, that even the smallest place, the humblest life, carries the infinite. The night held its breath, and I too held mine, afraid to break the fragile spell of being. For somewhere between waking and sleep, between silence and the sea, the town still spoke, softly, endlessly to itself.